Hello and welcome along to A State of Mind Sell the Jerseys, the podcast that takes a look at football kits, football culture and everything else in between. It's a podcast that, just like George Weah, makes a mazy run from box to box before slotting home past the keeper, but unlike George Weah's cousin, we've been invited back for a second outing. And joining me on today's podcast is journeyman writer Daniel Gray. Daniel is an author, copywriter, screenwriter, podcaster, editor, researcher, presenter, interviewer, event chair, video maker, writer in residence. He's a writer and contributor to When Saturday Comes magazine. He's the editor of Nutmeg magazine, the sports feature writer for Scotland on Sunday. He's the author of Homage to Caledonia, the story of the Scots who fought Franco, and a fan of Middlesbrough FC. Daniel, welcome to the show.
Amazing, Paul. Thanks for having me.
It's wonderful to have you, Daniel. Today in this episode we are going to take a look at the ins and outs of season 95-96 season, a real turning point in football, shaping the future for clubs across Scotland. So many talking points, Daniel. I'm dead excited to start chatting to you about them.
Yeah, likewise. A real a season when, with one foot in the old world and one foot in the new, a bit like me perhaps, I don't know.
It's a season of new arrivals, fond farewells, brave new beginnings, some fantastic kits, memorable matches, great interviews, and it's all set to the soundtrack of Britpop. What more can you ask for? So, turn up your collar like an enigmatic Frenchman and lace up your Sika blades for A State of Mind, Sell the Jerseys. You can't win anything with kids. The story of the 95-96 season.
Is this a bit of history? It is! Out with a shot and it's there!
And he's got to go to Middlesbrough and get something. And I'll tell you, honestly, I will love it if we beat them. Love it.
You can't win anything with kids.
A summer signing by... How do you feel?
I think they've got problems. I wouldn't say they've got major problems. Obviously, 3 players have departed. The trick is always buy when you're strong. So he needs to buy players. You can't win anything with kids.
Welcome back. The 94-95 season had seen the surprise transfer as German international Jurgen Klinsmann made the move from Monaco to Tottenham Hotspur, fresh from the World Cup. He lasted only one season before going back to his homeland and Bayern Munich. However, it appeared a bit of a shock at the time, but this would be the summer of surprise transfers to the UK. Arsenal paid a British record fee of £7.5 million to take the non-flying Dutchman Dennis Bergkamp from Inter Milan to Highbury, and Ruud Gullit joins Chelsea from Sampdoria. At this point, Daniel, the Premier League are very much Premier in name only. Arsenal are very British, but although very successful, reaching the Cup Winners' Cup 2 years in the trot, but they've still got the boring tag. Chelsea are known better for their headhunter casual fans than their hitmen. This is, as you've spoken about, the old world and the new. Is this the moment when there is a change in terms of players leaving Serie A and the top leagues to come and ply their trade in England?
It seems to be, and the thing with it is, you know, it's very much about money, but there was a cultural shift as well, I think, and it suddenly became attractive to players from those parts. And very slowly we stopped just getting the older foreigners at the end of their career, though there were many of those and some unheard of names as well. So of interest to me is, of course, Ruud Gullit towards the end of his career going to Chelsea playing sweeper. But it's also the likes of Sasa Čurčić going to Bolton Wanderers, playing at Burnden Park. And of course, my own team, Middlesbrough, getting players like Juninho to play alongside players like Jamie Pollock. And that's what I mean when I talk about it being part of the old and the new world. And it just makes it a completely fascinating time for me. The great TV series, Our Friends in the North, that was a fantastic drama set in Newcastle, running from the 1970s to the 1990s, finished in 1995. And to me, there's a reason for that, because not only did football change into something else around that time, but Britain did in general. You know, a couple of years away from the first Labour government in our lifetimes for some of us. And so it's a fascinating era with all of that musical background as well. As always, football was part of the change, the wider change in society, and foreign footballers were part of that, and it's just tremendously exciting.
A lot of time, like, you're looking at the teams in Italy who had the three foreigner rule, and you're looking at Hullet, who's come from a team that's made up with Marco van Basten and Frank Rijkaard, some of the best in the world, the best three foreigners in each club in Italy. English clubs, as you spoke about, tended to attract, for want of a better word, cheaper, less quality imports. Although at this point in time, there is one of the greatest foreign players who's plying their trade in England that didn't necessarily come as a star, and that's Eric Cantona.
Yeah, I mean, this was a season after Cantona had jumped into the crowd in an act of anti-fascism, still saluted today, at Selhurst Park, and I think it was October the 1st when he came back. The adverts were "Le God returns" and all of this. A superstar. And you're right, that happened very quickly, because only a couple of years before he'd been on loan, trials with Sheffield Wednesday, then he'd finally gone to Leeds, and his star just rose so quickly. And yeah, he was at the vanguard of it, of course, but a cheap import really, and hadn't really done that much elsewhere in France, apart from some spectacular sendings off among many great goals. But Cantona is the figurehead of all of that, absolutely, yeah.
With Hullet coming to Chelsea, he's kind of looking around him. It's a very different Chelsea from what Chelsea will eventually become. Within 4 years, they'll field 11 foreign players. And kind of with the exception of Dimitri Karin and Jakob Kjellberg, it's a very English team. So you've got Hullet playing with like Nigel Spackman and Paul Furlong, and he's got his first game against Gillingham at Priestfield. He's a former Ballon d'Or winner. He's now coming to play sweeper. What's Hullet thinking when he comes to England at this point?
Just incredible, and I've brought I've a lot of stuff left from this season and that time, and the Shoot magazine from them. He would have worn that kit with the grid on it at Gillingham on that occasion. You know, the fact they brought back this exciting position of sweeper just for him always says a lot to me. As if he had to walk on a different kind of pitch on a different plane. And Middlesbrough, this, as we'll probably come to, this was our first season at the Riverside, and the first game was against Ruud Hullit's Chelsea. And I remember walking up the stairs at the Riverside for the very first time. This is the programme. Thank You for the Days was playing actually over the tannoy, and seeing Ruud Hullet warming up. But at the same time, Ruud Hullet was smacking lofty balls across the Riverside pitch to the likes of Craig Burley. You know, Kevin Hitchcock was on the bench. It is Nigel Spackman. It is that old world and new world thing again, perfectly exemplified by Ruud Hullet. And what did he make of it all? Wow, I'd like to know. But just the most fascinating time. In this match, the Ladbrokes odds are on the back of the programme for the first goal scorer. Ruud Hullet 14-1, Jamie Pollock also 14-1, and that in one set of bookies odds is why 95-96 is a fascinating season, I think.
That was wonderful. Not only is Hullet kind of coming to the UK, but two men are coming home from Italy, I suppose, in terms of David Platt, who's come, the England captain, returned from Sampdoria to Arsenal, and Paul Gascoigne, who's spent 3 years either injured or trying to rediscover the form that he displayed for England in Italia 90. He signs for Rangers in a deal that's worth 4.3 million. I couldn't believe it when Gaza signed for Rangers, I'll not lie, I was a bit disappointed. But my dad just spent most of the pre-season going, he's going to end up crying, he'll cry, watch him, he'll get sent off and he'll cry. Like Gascoigne obviously celebrates his first goal for Rangers by playing an invisible flute and enters into a whole world that he never had considered before. Gaza, after Rangers went to Middlesbrough, after his time in Scotland, what were your thoughts on him? Was he a Geordie genius or a half-wit? Or?
Well, my first hero, really. I mean, there's much you learnt about him afterwards, about his private life, let's just call it, that you upset you and you're pretty appalled at. But speaking, I was, 8 years old during World Cup 90, and I had the Gaza bed covers afterwards. I loved him. I loved the skill of the man. I just as I got older, the carefree way in which he played football, which reminded you of one of your mates who was particularly brilliant at football, even looked like that kind of lad, sort of rough lad from the top estate that can play a bit. Always loved Gazza, still do now. The Rangers, at his time at Rangers, obviously a hero there still, but with the flute and everything he got wrong in Glasgow, just always surrounded himself with the wrong kind of advice, the wrong kind of advisors. Why didn't he have someone saying to him, when you're in Glasgow, be a bit careful, keep your head down, just play football a bit, go back to Newcastle on a Saturday night? And, all his life he was plagued by that. And of course, when he was up here as well. And I was delighted when we signed him. I was at his debut. He played in the League Cup final in '98 at Wembley. Came in, we lost that. He gave his runners-up medal to Craig Hignett. He felt it was unfair that he got one. But I was thinking really of the Gazza of 1990 when we signed him, and he was plagued by demons, is the word that's always used by the time he played for Middlesbrough. But some flashes. The difference with Gazza by the time he got to Middlesbrough was he could still beat 5 or 6 men, but it came to nothing usually. He would fall over. Sometimes he'd score the resultant free kick, but not that often.
See, the idea of trying to recapture form from World Cups, this is also a time when football isn't the way it is nowadays, where you might only ever see somebody at a World Cup. Ruud Gullit missed USA 94. So the last time I saw Ruud Gullit before he joined Chelsea is Italian 90.
Yeah.
And this is the thing about football at this point. We're still not watching it the way it's... I didn't have Sky back in those days, so I wouldn't see foreign channels.
No.
Channel 4, obviously, so I could still see bits in a Sunday, but it's very, very different how we watch football and how it's consumed. I would say about Gaz's haircut is that, like, most people in Glasgow, if they were Rangers fans, ended up with that haircut.
Yeah.
The orange walk seemed very colourful that year.
I can imagine. I can quite imagine. That's a really interesting point about image, though, because the only time you would see someone like Ruud Gullit was in World Cups or in still on the pages of World Soccer magazine, probably. So to suddenly see them, well, in my case, privilege being there's my season ticket from that year, 108 quid. Seeing them in the flesh was quite something that jumped out of the pages of these magazines, and then getting to see them on Match of the Day as well. You sound like such an old man when you talk about before the internet and all of that, but that's a really good way to explain things, is that an image was usually quite still of all of these people, so you didn't really know how they moved and what their true stature was. I remember that moment of seeing Ruud Gullit for the first time and realising how big he was, and thinking, why are we in this division? This is going to go terribly wrong. As it happened, we beat them 2-0. But the transition from the still to the real sums up again that season. Things that you never thought possible became quite real. And
obviously, like Ruud Gullit, we were linked with David Ginola all summer.
Yeah.
Waited for that news to happen. Obviously, gone to Newcastle. Ruud Gullit was linked with Middlesbrough at different times as well.
With catastrophic consequences for the local Sports Gazette, who decided in perhaps an early version of Photoshop to put Ruud Gullit's head onto the body of a man I've identified since as Curtis Fleming. An amazing bit of graphic design, I think viewers will agree. Electronically created, it does say, by Mike Jones, a little disclaimer there.
Like we now live in the days of this. I can't believe that's what they've done at that point. But like we live in the days where we would find out news on the internet, or you can get weekly or minute updates. But back in those days, we're living day by day via teletext and via newspapers to find who might come to join us, who might not be there. And I'm actually, I remember finding out Ginola was going to Newcastle via teletext. Jonathan Burns, who's Tommy Burns' son, told me years later that Ginola is about to go Ginola's about to go to Celtic, and is talked out it by Fergus McCann saying, "You think you can cope against Falkirk on a wet Wednesday night?" And Tommy Burns is kicking him under the table. "What are you doing?" So eventually Ginola goes to Newcastle, and we sign Andreas Thom. But for both our clubs, for Celtic and for Middlesbrough, there is a homecoming for us. Celtic have won the Scottish Cup the previous season. Is that optimism? We've returned from Hampden to the new built Parkhead, still partially under construction. We'd lived with the possibility of going to Cambuslang under the old regime, which was very unpopular and wasn't going to happen. But thanks to Fergus McCann's vision, we have a stadium that's biggest in Britain. Newcastle, who are going to be such a big story this season, come to play their debut or match at the new stadium against Celtic. But you too have that optimism of a return to a new a new start, and a new Premiership under Brian Robson. You're moving from Ayresome Park to the Riverside Arena. What was that like to you as a youngster to say goodbye to somewhere and to go to somewhere completely new?
I would have been sadder now. I just felt the excitement at the time, but as I've become older, I've mourned the loss of so many football grounds. Just recently, my second team of York City, because we moved away from Teesside when I was a kid and used to go and watch York as well. Just recently, I had Bootham Crescent to myself, which is shortly to be knocked down. I went along and said to the groundsman, "Can I just pop in?" And there I was, and just taking it all in, what a football ground means, what its place is, why it should be in the middle of a city. Had I been this age then, I would have really regretted the loss of Ayresome, but at the time I was just tremendously excited. I was at the last game against Luton Town. I can see myself now, when you watch the highlights, running on the pitch afterwards and running up to Alan Moore. I remember it well, the left winger, and saying, "Can I have your shirt?" So there I am with my big step and my curtains. So it's one of the glories of football. I write about these things in my Delights book, about knowing where you were on one particular day. Not if you don't follow football, you're probably not able to say that very often. We've got it all written down. We can almost remember what we were wearing. We can certainly remember who we were with, where we had our chips from that day. That's a wonderful thing. I think it anchors you, and so I can anchor back to Ayresome Park and that day and that whole summer of being tremendously excited. Driving up to Middlesbrough on some July afternoon to get these shirts, still fit me somehow because things were baggy then is the real reason. Then going to the Riverside to watch it being built. There was loads of us there. Every time you went, there was a little porter cabin where you could find out information about it. Just seeing this thing rise in an area that had only known things to be knocked down. You know, the shipyards had gone, the steelworks were on the way out. To see something rising, something optimistic on Teesside, was completely an unknown feeling to us all. We were still under a Tory government. We weren't used to any investment in our area. And so this was when you put all that together, you can see that this was a ground move that probably had to be made for the football club. Although I still think about Ayresome Park at least every couple of days. It was something that had to happen for the area as much as the team, and it was the catalyst of why we ended up with Brian Robson as manager. He wouldn't have come if we were staying at Ayresome Park. And so everything that happened to Middlesbrough was to do with Steve Gibson making it happen with his money and his drive, but it was to do with the stadium. So overall, complete excitement, but it doesn't mean that even as a 14, 15-year-old kid, I didn't mourn Ayresome Park. I've still got some grass that I took from the pitch that day. And I was only able to go back to the area about 10 years ago of where Ayresome Park was, because I felt too sad about the whole thing and it not being there, and to trace it. And I still do go and walk back there occasionally now, because interestingly in Middlesbrough, you can walk from the house Don Reevy was born in to the house Brian Clough lived in when they were kids, and you always pass Ayresome Park when you do that, which is shows you the football culture of the town, really.
That's wonderful. Like as you mentioned, Brian Robson, who comes with so much hope. I remember the season beforehand on Football Focus, they're playing New Kid in Town by the Eagles, and it's a video with Robson and his journey that he's going to take on.
Yeah. So
he leads Middlesbrough to promotion as a player manager. Glenn Hodd was a player manager. Roy Race was a player manager. What's your thoughts on player manager?
Oh, it's a dying art, isn't it? Earlier this season, I was at Cowdenbeath Brechin covering it for When Saturday Comes magazine, and Michael Payton, I think his name is, was player manager and captain. I thought keeping the spirit alive on 3 levels there, son. That's tremendous. And I think he subbed himself as well, which is all of the things you want to see. But yeah, it's such a confusing thing. The example again, and I'm sorry, lots of these things will be about Middlesbrough. That's who I lived that season through, really. But it's thinking back to Robbo sort of subbing himself, and it's also when they put themselves on the bench, you have to have a certain level of self-belief, I suppose you might call it, that I could influence this game, which there were 20,000 people in the crowd also going, I could influence this game, I could do something this afternoon. So he's on the bench thinking like that, who shall I take off? And the dynamics with the players themselves going, do they call him Gaffer on the pitch, or does he have a different name on the pitch? It's a role that has sadly and slowly died out, but I love a player manager. I hope it comes back into fashion.
Maybe Peyton had been reading old Roy the Rovers magazine and thought, I'll be captain as well. because Roy can do it. I can do it. I always like Barry Fry when he'd wear the away strip for the kit. He'd always be dressed up, but obviously had no intention of ever playing. Was never registered as a player manager for Petersburg, but just thought I'll put the kit on. Yeah. There's some truly, when I talk about kits, there's some wonderful kits from that season. In the first episode of this show, we focused on the Celtic centenary kit, but this is, and we looked a wee bit historically at football kits, but this is where there's a huge boom in kits across the game. Football strips aren't just being worn on the pitch. It's the kids that have now grown up into teenagers and into adults that are wearing them. So at this end, you've got manufacturers are actually considering, how aesthetically they will look with a pair of jeans. And here we are, and I'm in an XL Celtic top from that season that I got for my 15th birthday. There's some, it does not fit the jeans that I'm wearing underneath there just now. It's massive. But there's some real crackers out this season, some amazing kits. Have you got any favourites of your own from the 95-96?
I mean, the reason I love this kit particularly is the Aria, who are the Italian make that only we had for a while until Stenhouse, Muir and Hearts and others got on the Aria bandwagon. To their credit, whoever designed it wove into the fabric the transporter bridge, which is the landmark of Middlesbrough that we're very proud of, built with Motherwell steel, actually, weirdly for a steel city like Middlesbrough, and the badge. So, and the jeans thing, it was supposed to go with your Geordie jeans on holiday and all of that, which a wider point about that is that's because football and wearing a football top was suddenly socially acceptable. The way football fans were treated from the mid-80s until the early 90s was that they were all hooligans, and you would be a bit embarrassed to wear your football shirt quite often, never mind as a fashion accessory. People would say, don't wear your football top to this. We don't want them thinking we're common. And then suddenly they're saying, wear a football top with jeans, and it's all sort of fantasy football on BBC Two and that kind of look. If you think about the video for Football's Coming Home, I know this is a Scottish podcast, but at the end of the season, it's that look of the jeans, the Puma trainers or the Adidas trainers with the football top underneath the jacket. So suddenly leisure wear. But as for favourite tops, I have one image in my head right now, and that's of the beautiful David Ginola. I don't think there's ever been a more handsome footballer next to Peter Beardsley. After they won at Sheffield Wednesday, Newcastle early on, Ginola got man of the match, and it's in that wonderful hooped strip. A sort of maroon burgundy colour and a blue. It's like a rugby shirt and a strange collar, and it was made of very nice material as well. And that sticks in my mind, and in that image in particular, because none of us would look good next to David Ginola, in fairness, but to put the man sometimes named Quasimodo next to him was just unfair on Sky.
I think
Sports
we'll put that picture in because we were looking at it just before the show started. Certainly the Newcastle top is the home underwear, beautiful kits. Adidas taking over from the Asics manufacturer the season before. They get the kind of grandad collar. Collars had kind of been in since about 1989, so this is a kind of throwback to the 1920s. The Newcastle Brown Ale logo even looks amazing on it too. And it's that kind of heavier sort of material. The away kit actually is based on the strip called from Newcastle West End that was worn before they formed with Newcastle East End to create Newcastle United. Ultimately, 95-96 is going to be a heartbreaking season for Newcastle. I can also think as well with talking about Adidas strips, Liverpool, who are in their kind of last season with Adidas, they're bringing out this kind of cream Liverpool kit as well.
A crew?
Yeah, with the crew cut collar, the big kind of
But
cricket
it was the name of they used the word. Was that the year after when they had a kit that they marketed as being Ecru, ECCRU? That was the colour they were supposed to be.
Yeah, to fit with jeans and casual wear again.
Yeah.
It's just you spoke about how a few minutes ago people weren't going to look at football at all. With the Euros coming up at the end of the season, manufacturers, advertisers, they're actually starting to get really that subliminal advertising with let's stick football in somewhere, and football all of a sudden has become acceptable once again in terms of selling products and having place on television. Fantasy Football League on a Friday night, I knew where I was going to be when I was that age at that time. I loved Fantasy Football League, and I loved those wee cheeky references every so often with the Celtic flag scarf in the top corner. I loved the kind of the way that they kind of discussed or found clips that were funny. I don't know how you could troll through hundreds of thousands of football clips every week.
It seemed like a dream job at the time, didn't it? As a teenager, you thought, who gets to do that job? Same thing, routine every Friday night, 11:15. It was quite a late programme, wasn't it? But I loved things they did, like Pele was shite clips just showing like where Pele shoots from the halfway line, and then the tune comes on, Pele, wash right, Pele, wash, all of those things. And yet some of it you look back on and you really cringe, or at worst feel angry. Yeah. I'm thinking of the Jason Lee thing where listeners, viewers may wish to find it for themselves. David Baddiel and all that, which had a real effect on Jason Lee himself. He's said since, and so you think, God, we were just teenagers, so I don't remember if we laughed along or what, or did we think this is a bit wrong or what? But now you go, God, that is pretty shocking.
Parts of it's not aged well at all when it goes to references like this, and how much of an effect it had on Jason Lee as a player. You know, when I'm looking also at the Middlesbrough top that you're wearing, the Cellnet, I spoke in the last podcast about sponsors. Yeah. This is kind of the age of technology coming into strips. At this point, Celtic are still C.R. Smith, a local double glazing company. Yeah. You know, whereas Cellnet now all of a sudden it's this kind of new industry, and you talked about Middlesbrough steel and everything else, and ICI had been, and now it's like looking at the shift has gone from an industry and it's going into this new age of communication. Yeah, it's kind of going in strips. And Cellnet were just brilliant, getting the naming rights to the stadium. So in Middlesbrough, we never said the Riverside. We used to say, "Oh, are you going to the Cellnet on Saturday?" It's still an enjoyable thing some of us do now. Are you off to the Cellnet on Saturday? And still call it the Cellnet, but they got their names on everything. So this flag is from Juninho's debut at the end of October in 1996. Cellnet and Boro already on one side, Cellnet and Boro on the other. They were giving out foam hands. I still got my foam hand at home, but I didn't want to bring it on the 49 bus. And they were just superb. So we knew what, and if we ever got, none of us had a mobile, but we knew if we were ever going to get one, it would be Cellnet. They were their marketing was tremendous in that. It was all over everything. It really was the programme. All of these freebies they were giving us, making a generation of kids like me just waft around the word Cellnet all the time. But yeah, you're right, it's a shift. We went from the Evening Gazette, the local paper, after we'd been sponsored by Dickens, the local hardware store, to ICI, one of the local international industries, and pretty soon into something like Cellnet. It just changes everything, how we look at sponsorship and how football kind of is starting to make that move. It's the old world into the new. Yeah. Talk about of one of the most notorious kits of that season is Manchester United's grey strip. Yeah. That has become synonymous with bad kit choices. And people putting function to the side and thinking about what looks good in a pair of jeans in the pub. Alex Ferguson, obviously, Man United are very unsuccessful in this kit. But, this is an idea of people maybe thinking of things that could be jinxed, or things that could be bad luck, or things that just you couldn't see your teammate in these kits. But they kind of persist with it for long enough. Some wonderful strips under the floodlights. Juventus's away kit with the big giant stars on his shoulders. Barcelona have got Kappa, and there's a wonderful Borussia Dortmund strip. But as we move into the start of the season, it's the smell of fresh grass and CK1, I suppose, is the scent of 1995. And we're kicking off with Blur versus Oasis as the first kind of big rivalry of that season. Who was your favourite, Blur or Oasis? Oasis by a mile. I still don't particularly like Blur now. In retrospect, you think that might be a north-south thing, but a lot of those labels have been placed on in retrospect, I think, whereas I was just enjoying my tapes, never had an album, spent any penny I had on football stuff. So all of mine were tapes from other kids, and Morning Glory, and Definitely Maybe I had one on each side. And linking all that together, I remember going on holiday to Spain that summer of 95, and going to the new camp on the tour in this top, and listening to those albums on the coach from Salou, from our hotel. All of that, that's just the most 1995 moment I can think of, almost. Everything coming together like that. I think I went to Cornwall in 1995, or 95. Yeah, I didn't have this top at that point, but I was down in Cornwall with my mum and dad, and kind of basking in the glory of the Scottish Cup. And even like, if you saw somebody that had a Celtic top elsewhere in the middle of Cornwall, you'd go, "Big man, Champ, yes. Things, you know, you could be
That's brilliant.
in your shorts on a beach.
Yeah, any Celtic fan in Cornwall on holiday this year should go to the clubhouse of Newquay FC, Newquay Town, because they've got a Chris Morris little unit inside there where you can look at some of Chris Morris's things that he won over the years. There's some Celtic things in there and some Middlesbrough things, Sheffield Wednesday things in there.
Of course.
Yeah.
My brother was a massive Chris Morris fan, and when he had his Subbuteo League that we spoke about in the last season, the last episode, Chris Morris was one of his star Subbuteo players, even though it was the 90s. He always get a kind of a fourth extra flick, usually. We really enjoy Chris Morris and his exploits with Ireland.
Something very glamorous about a man who can leave international football and open up a chain of pasty shops, isn't there?
I mean, it's a man of many talents. Football, I think, is intertwined with even the politics and things that are going on in the 90s, and obviously football is intertwined. Mainstream media is starting to align itself, or it's seen it beforehand as the kind of black sheep of culture in the UK. If people talk about 1992 as being the kind of modern era of football, when the Premier League starts, I'm not too sure if that's the case, but 10 years beforehand, people are describing football as a sort of slum sport played by slum people in slum stadiums. Where do you see that the line being crossed? People are now not afraid to say I'm a football fan. Do you see this is a defining season for that to go on? Yes,
and it's often put down to the, as you say, 92 and to Fever Pitch. One of my very favourite books, the inspiration for being a writer. But I think it was way after, or a couple of years after that. Certainly in my part of England and in Scotland, I think. Perhaps in London it happened a bit earlier. But football in 95 still in most of England and Scotland a working class game played by working class British people, watched by the British working class. And so in 95, with the likes of Middlesbrough, and there can be few more working class football clubs than Middlesbrough and more working class towns than Middlesbrough, moving to a ground with hospitality, that's a key thing, and that being a big part of match day revenue, that's a real movement away from that. And so in 95, the Riverside was the biggest stadium built in Britain since the war. And so with a capacity of 30,000, and it started many more teams. I'm not saying we inspired them, but it was the first one of many more teams leaving. So in that season, this is the first season of 20 teams rather than 22, isn't it? And I think 6 have since left their ground. 6 have since departed the top division by a long way, Coventry, Sheffield Wednesday and all of the rest, Boro. But there was a lot of old school grounds. That season, I went to Burndon Park, Bolton's old ground. Half of the away end was a supermarket by then. Look that one up, it's tremendous. And Highfield Road was still there. Highbury was, of course, still there. So we still had old school grounds. Everyone was in their original ground almost that they'd been in since Victorian times or Edwardian times. But when you had a club like Middlesbrough embracing executive boxes, there's a shift there going on, and they're realising companies want to be associated with football. That's the thing. Your medium-sized businessman wants to say, "Yeah, I've got a box at the Cellnet." That's now what the people that want a bit of kudos for their business are talking about. Suddenly, it's gone from that editorial mention about slum stadiums in the Times, written in the 80s, and Kevin Keegan and Tony Blair doing headers, and politicians wanting to be near footballers and around football, where there wouldn't, it was a shitty stick before that. 95's the very crux of that, and the start of it being the Lovies game and the politicians game. Absolutely, yeah.
Talking about the other things to do with football at this point also, you're a writer with some of the fantastic magazines such as Nutmeg, and When Saturday Comes, you've written for so many publications. But I think as well, this 95-96 season kicks off some amazing football magazines that are out there, like Total Football, there's Goal that's coming out. They're also starting to launch, it's not just so much with the shoot and match anymore, but I'm noticing there's a shift in football and how it's read, and how they're kind of linking sort of this idea of new man or new lad culture that's going on also in the publications. I kind of ditched buying Match and Shoot as much that season, although I still did, and I would stop putting on my posters up with Ludette McCloskey and Frankie Benali, and started to read more about kind of football and enjoy it in a much deeper way with things like When Saturday Comes. What were the magazines that you were kind of reading back then?
That's amazing to think that I haven't brought any of the monthlies along with me, but Goal, beautifully designed, Total Football, a bit sort of brasher, what happened there was the big magazine companies were now saying, "Oh, football's trendy. We need a bit of that coin." So when Saturday Comes had been around since the mid-1980s and was and is the true fans magazine and never has cashed in, it's the opposite of cashed in, it's sort of struggled from year to year. But these other ones came along to compete. I was, like you, spending every bit of pocket money or eventually my wages from the British Home Stores Cafe on all of them. So I loved Shoot, still subscribe to Shoot. A lot of the Shoots I've got have my address and my name on them. I must have got it delivered or collected down at the newsagents. But I loved 90 Minutes. 90 Minutes to me was kind of in between the monthly ones and Shoot. It was I liked. I think the writing was slightly aimed at a slightly older audience, and I could just about understand most of it. Whereas sometimes when Saturday Comes was still too clever for a sort of middle set at school kid like me to get all of it. And I loved 90 Minutes. I loved particularly the geeky side of me loved the results columns in the middle, which were detailed with the little graphics of the men of the week and things like players of the week and all of that. So 90 Minutes was the one I absolutely loved and looked forward to so much. But I think that's had a massive effect on the job I've ended up doing. The job from when I realised I couldn't quite be a footballer was to write about football, and I've no doubt that's because I was surrounded by all these bits of paper which I've kept many of, and it was the richest time because we still had a vibrant fanzine movement, so I could get my Fly Me to the Moon, the Boro fanzine, for £1 on the way to the ground, renamed Voanda Para a Lua, Fly Me to the Moon in Portuguese for that season for Juninho, and I could get these glossy ones as well, and I could get When Saturday Comes, and so that's the richest time in football magazine literature I think there's been, and there's a reason that people of our age are still really into print, I think.
Yeah, I loved Total Football. I loved When Saturday Comes. I loved Goal magazine. The idea of like finding, everything had different ways of being written as well. Like When Saturday Comes, born out the fanzine movement. And you've got magazines like Total Football, which are a bit naughty at times, cheeky. I don't think if my mum maybe had picked up and read it, she'd be like, I get in a bit of trouble for it. But a great magazines nonetheless. Kicking off the season, and we're going to look at Blackburn Rovers going in as defending champions. Kenny Dalglish moves on to director of football, and Ray Harford takes over as manager. Man United are without Eric Cantona, banned for his kung fu kick and as a Crystal Palace fascist fan during a match the previous season. Man United have sold Paul Ince to Inter Milan. Mark Hughes has gone to Chelsea. Kanchelski is to Everton. They're at the point of breeding in a crop of very talented youngsters, Nicky Butt, Paul Scholes, the Nevilles, David Beckham. But on the opening day of the season, are soundly beaten by Aston Villa 3-1, which... wearing the grey shirt, which brings Alan Hansen to say, you can't win in with kids. In terms of like punditry and in terms of saying things that might come back to haunt you, have you ever been guilty of writing anything like this?
Very possibly. I remember a player called Mark Yates who signed for Boro. He'd been at Spurs as a youth, and I went to watch him play in a pre-season friendly at Dumbarton. This is in the early 2000s, and I wrote in the fanzine, mark my words, he is the next hero.
Oh, really?
He lasted a year. And he's playing in the 9th tier of English football now. All the time. I think it's probably why I've started concentrating more on retro and historical writing, because you can't get the past too wrong. I think. Wow, it's brilliant thinking of that match of the day set, isn't it? Quite a lot of browns and purples going on. Very dark set when you think about the way football is very in your face and the graphics shout at you now. It was sort of like a funeral parlour, the set of Match of the Day and the Des Lynam handing over to Gary Lineker kind of era of coverage.
I think I know, looking at some of the optimistic scenes that are possibly lying ahead, the season's going very well for Kevin Keegan's Newcastle, very well indeed. Going forward, they're looking unstoppable. Ferdinand is kind of living off the crosses provided by Ginola and Keith Gillespie. Pre-egg making Peter Beardsley, if you're a fan of my podcast, is crafting so much as a number 10. And at the back, though, it's a very different story. Kevin Keegan is very much of the if they score 3, we'll score 4 variety, seen as a sort of motivational manager. But the ease of which Newcastle's kind of playing and scoring goals, it's just a case of really putting good players out there, encouraging them to express themselves. What obviously Newcastle are your rivals. What are your thoughts looking back, I suppose, with that idea of hindsight? Do you see them romantically nowadays, or is there still that rivalry there?
There's not the rivalry anymore, especially because I'm older, but especially because we're rarely in the same division anymore. At the time, I just feared them winning anything. I used to just not sleep at night worrying that this was all going to work and they were going to win the league and be the first of the North East Renaissance to win something. But now, absolutely romantic about it. The kits, the look of it, the football they played, the clips where Keegan and John McDermott seem to be racing each other to run from the dugout as if they've got a bet on every time when Newcastle score. They spring out from the various dugouts of English football. Again, that combination of having, say, Darren Peacock at the back, but David Ginola as well. Just brilliant juxtapositions. The football they played, though, is what really excites me when I watch it again. It's very incisive and direct without going long or anything, but it's about the wings and it's about crosses in. And I don't remember seeing a better header of a ball than Les Ferdinand, who really was an artistic header of the ball. It's a much derided skill. We worry about heading now. Let's not skate over that. Maybe heading will be a thing of the past soon. That's a different issue in some ways. But in terms of the skill of heading, and it's often just written off as some industrial skill, it's not. Ferdinand could head the ball in a nuanced way. He could angle it. He could move a really whipped cross in and divert it, or he could put a cross in with not much weight on it and put it into the net. That's just every bit as skillful as doing something with your foot. He's doing something with your head, man. What can any of us do with our heads? Open the door when we're carrying a few pints, maybe. You know, it's an incredible thing to be able to move an object with your head subtly and beautifully and make a net bulge and make a stadium erupt like that. So when you look again at that team now, it's tremendously exciting, and I love watching through Keegan's movement from a stress-free, attack-minded, quite a cool guy, by March cracking up under Ferguson's mind games and all of this. But some of Keegan's brilliant things he did, like sit on the steps of St James Park to explain why he'd sold Andy Cole. Fantastic. Unthinkable now for a manager to address his fans directly. A brilliant thing, a really brilliant thing. He's the most interesting story in that year, really. I think Keegan himself and the whole narrative of it, and Our Friends in the North, that TV series I mentioned, ending in that year in Newcastle. Fascinating place in time and fascinating place in general. So yeah, I think Newcastle are the story of that season.
This season for me, I love this season, but it's tinged with the sadness of Celtic not winning the league, but the manner in which Celtic played was so good, so cavalier. You know, they came back from Hampden having not played that well all throughout the course of the season to play this really amazing cavalier attitude. Just lots of crosses, lots of heads from Big Pierre Van Hooijdonk. I love Tommy Burns' ethos that he established into it, and I see there's also there's a lot of similarities in the way that Keegan's Newcastle played and Celtic's team played. Celtic obviously at that time couldn't win the smaller games against, not smaller games, but they didn't beat Rangers, but there were games that they drew, with Partick Thistle and Falkirk and Kilmarnock. They just couldn't find that edge. And I look back and I think, had we got Janilla that season, we'd have cracked it. So there's that heartbreak at the end of the season of realising that Celtic didn't win, and Rangers won 8 in a row, and Gaza had this tremendous season. But there's still tremendous pride that I have for how Celtic played that season. I still think there's not been a better time that Celtic have played football to watch them, and the way that they kind of came together.
I was going to say, Paul, I had a Celtic education that season because a kid called Chris McLaughlin moved down from Cumbernauld and went to our school. His accent standing out as much as mine has since I've moved up here then. And Chris was always in his full Celtic kit, which as soon as we got home from school, uniform off, but the full kit, which I loved. Used to put the actual socks on when we were just mucking around on our bikes, which is quite a commitment. And so he taught me all about Pierre Van Hooijdonk. I remember well because it's funny to think back, and I often think back now that I write quite a bit about Scottish football and I edit Nutmeg, a Scottish football magazine. How did I get my Scottish coverage then? Because already the English Premier League was beginning to saturate things and had signed a much better TV deal, as usual, same old stories in Scotland. But I think Scottish highlights occasionally on the end of match of the day, and there was midweek match of the days and things. And if you ask me to name one player that season, it's definitely Van Hooijdonk, who I picture.
Yeah. Do you know, like, I was going to ask you later on, but I'll bring it up just now. A lot of your writing now is about Scottish football as well, and you've got a real love for the junior game, for lowland leagues. You attend matches across the country in every division. Do you see a kind of romanticism with Scottish football that's maybe been lost elsewhere in the big money of the Premiership?
It's authenticity, yeah, or occasionally romanticism. I'm definitely romantic about it. Sometimes it takes an outsider, I think, to see it that way, because I come here without prejudice. I don't really have a Scottish team. I go and watch Hibs quite a lot with my daughter because we live nearby, but I don't have those irrational hatreds of anyone. I have in England. There are clubs that I still can't stand, but here I don't have that. So I go with an open eye. I have nothing against a town, for instance. I've never not liked someone from there. I have none of those, which really helps when you go into a place. But then you get there, and yeah, absolutely, the one of the often cited weaknesses of Scottish football is the lack of money, but to me it's been the strength of Scottish football that the lack of investment has meant that you've kept grounds like Somerset Park and Capello and Palmerston and Starks Park, the old main corner stand there. Because of that lack of money, you've been able to maintain characterful grounds, and I'm the first to say Riverside isn't a characterful ground. It is to me, because I've had many of the greatest moments of my life there, and worst. But what has happened in Scotland is you've been able to keep the grounds, most of the grounds, the centre of town grounds, the very few out of town grounds, but also the ethos of football here, because there isn't much money in the game. So I go and watch Cowdenbeath. I really like Cowdenbeath, and the players have all got jobs as well, and they're not earning much from playing football, and actually now they could earn more by going into some of the lowland league clubs, because of the way things are, or even in juniors as was. And so there's a lot of people playing football because they just love it still, and they would be playing football at any level, and that has been lost so much in higher up the game. So you feel that you're watching someone that feels like you do, someone that loves the sound of a ball on it as it strikes into a net, someone that loves the thud of a slide tackle. You feel that in Scotland, that there's not so much of a gap between the supporters and the fans. And I dare say that's the case, of course, in the non-league in England and in the lower league, but this is where I live now, and I found a lot of my love for the game again by going to those places.
Wonderful. You write about as well some of the different things in your book, such as players going in goals. This is also a season where goalkeepers come to the fore for some of the madness and different things that happen. You get Peter Schmeichel scoring in Europe for Manchester United against Trabzonspor. You have Rene Higuita performing a scorpion kick. Higuita I'd never seen before in my life until playing that game against England where he does a scorpion kick. So immediately, I used to be a goalkeeper back in the day, so immediately I'm doing it the next day.
Did you get warned against it at school? I remember school assembly where we were told not to do the Higuita, and just watching Mr. Connell Smith try and pronounce Higuita was tremendous.
No, I think it was embraced. Although the only person that warned me was Jim Sweeten, my manager at Aston Villa Boys Club, about 3 years later when I would do South American things. Sorry, Jim, I've got a kind of South American flair that really led to
I think it was on News Round when we were told, don't be doing this, kids, bye.
It's also the fact that I think that back in those days there was a bit of eccentricity about goalkeepers that you don't have nowadays. Actually, to kick the season off, we've got Bruce Grobler, who's up in who's in court for different things as well. So I would have taken a bung as well at some point, and if there's something from the other class asked if I would let in a couple of goals for it.
It was the first time they were getting properly loud shirts as well. The designers were thinking of the goalkeepers at long last, weren't they? But goalkeepers scoring. In Saturday 3pm, which is a book I did of Little Delights of Football, there's a chapter about outfield players going in goal, and then in the sequel to that, Extra Time, which came out just last year, there's one about when goalkeepers go up, and that was certainly happening. It's sort of 3 years after the back pass rule change, so by now they were feeling a bit more cocky and confident, thinking, I can play football a bit, I can play with my feet. I'm going to go forward a bit
I
more.
was putting goals because I couldn't play football.
Yeah.
So that's why I started off there. I'm quite good at this. But I didn't mind saying it with my face.
And in this very season was one of the few times I saw an outfield player in goal, and I was there. I was at Elland Road. Middlesbrough had lost. We didn't win from Boxing Day until March the 30th. And March the 30th was Leeds away when Lukic was injured and Lucas Radebe went in goal and was absolutely brilliant with the kick saves. And the usual thing of the shirt looking far too big for him and all of that.
Darren Jackson ended up in goals for Hibs against Celtic this season as well, and they kind of he's putting the gloves, strapping them on, the jersey's hanging out. You know, he doesn't really. He might only stay in for 2 more goals, and then he'd ask somebody else if they want.
Yeah. And what I always think of when I watch those are the stink of gloves. Yeah. You'd be on hand as a keeper yourself, giving someone else the gloves. You'd go in goal for one, and then and your hands were still like that for days after. Oh, got a glove smell. I've got a glove smell.
My mum would tell me to put my gloves out the back because they would stink out the back of the kitchen. I'd wash them in the sink and I'd use dyes and I'd put them to the side and then they'd just be honking.
You've got to wonder what they were made from in 1995. There was not the same environmental concerns back then.
Well, when I broke my finger playing in goals last year and had to get bits replaced on my pinky, I kept my gloves in my boot. And then my wife was like driving it, what is that smell? And it was my gloves and my boots that were just honking out the actual boot. I'd forgotten to remove them after the injury. I
seem to remember the perfect way to be attractive to the opposite sex, trying to get a girlfriend at that time, was definitely to smell of goalkeeping gloves and to eat scampi fries. or in fact, scampi and lemon knickknacks were a snack of choice at that time. A very, very smelly time.
I like a cheese moment myself.
Yeah.
Back to league action. October sees the return of Eric Cantona, just a phenomenal player. When you talk about your Bergkamps and Klinsmans, as we spoke about this earlier on, Cantona doesn't come to the UK as a ready-made star, but you know, he comes in, he becomes a star, he reinvents himself in England, having become, as I suppose, an unwanted visitor without much fanfare. On the other hand, in Middlesbrough there is a samba beat in the air as Juninho arrives in Teesside, samba bands. What, you know, you were there.
Yeah.
You know, tell me about Mexican hats. Who cares about culture? And when he comes out in his suit, he looks a wee bit like the boy from Big.
He does.
Young Josh Baskin.
Looking back to the car at the end.
They ask him about the being very cold in Middlesbrough as well. You know, he says this isn't Siberia. What's your thoughts on all this?
What a time to be alive. I mean, October the 7th was a Saturday, and that was when it was announced he definitely signed, and it was an international break. I was in the back of a friend's car. His dad had taken us swimming, and it was on the radio that Juninho had arrived. The deal had been made. Keith Lamb and Brian Robson had gone out there to Brazil, which always impressed Juninho. He used to say the fact that Mr. Robson came out to see me. What you got with a lot of the foreigners Boro signed, obviously they came for vast sums of money, but they always said it was Brian Robson I was impressed by, because because Robbo didn't quite play in the most glitzy era of Man United or the Premier League. It's forgotten how brilliant Robbo was. Played in 3 World Cups, still as player manager for Boro, still a wonderful footballer. So these were the generation of footballers who'd grown up thinking he's one of the best in the world, and suddenly he was trying to sign them. That was massive in these signings. Juninho coming though, it was just a case of going down to the newsagent and looking on the back of the paper every day to see if the deal had been done. I became very intimately knowledgeable about the work permit process. That was something that was always mentioned. We were always looking up in the paper about how you did that CFAX onto 302, onto 140 on ITV, checking if it had changed again and again. And then the final magic moment on that Saturday when he signed, heard it probably on Radio 5 in that car. And then it was just a case of not knowing quite when his debut was going to be because of all this international clearance. There was thousands turning up at the Riverside. I couldn't get along living an hour away for that one, to see him do kick-ups on the pitch and all of that stuff. But the excitement of that was just incredible. The rumour was he'd play against QPR and they sold 4,000 tickets, and then they said, no, actually, there's no chance we'll have the paperwork. And then he did make his debut against Leeds. Growing up in further down Yorkshire as I did, all the other kids supported Leeds, and that's the team I disliked, hated most growing up because everyone else supported them. Don't have that feeling now at all. But And so being against Leeds made it even bigger for me, and getting to the ground. And as you say, the sombreros, fellas outside selling sombreros. I was 14 years old, I didn't care. It's all South America.
That's amazing. You spoke earlier on, you have also experience with Howard Wilkinson at this season.
Yeah. I was going through things and found this clipping from the York Evening Press of when Howard Wilkinson, then Leeds United manager, came to open the new AstroTurf pitch at my school, which used to really knack your knees. And there, next to Howard, and a piece of paper fell out of Howard's the back pocket of his tracksuit. And for some reason, I must have been quite a wag, quite a witty man at that time. I said, "Oh, Howard, is that Thomas Brolin's contract?" Because Leeds were just signing Brolin, the Swedish international and now Hoover salesman at the time. And Howard Wilkinson turned to me and said, "Thomas Brolin could not even fit his signature on that piece of paper." And we all just looked at each other thinking, what, has he got massive writing? I don't really know what you mean.
He's gone down in everyone's estimation all of a sudden. Oh, man.
Yeah. What are you on about, Howard?
All these kids in middle shades moving shaking their head at him. Brolin and Yeboah, two also massively great players that season.
Never tire of watching those Yeboah goals. Not just the one at Wimbledon when Martin Tyler sounded like he was having some sort of moment of gladness inside his underpants.
We'll put that on.
The one against Liverpool classically, which looks hot that night. When you look at that night, everyone looks hot on the pitch. A hot August night in Beeston. But some of the other goals he scored, what a player. See, again, because we didn't have endless transfer speculation on telly, it was just on the flashing bit at the bottom of teletext saying Leeds I Ghanaian star or whatever it would be. You didn't really know much about Tony Yeboah. You might have seen him in World Soccer. So it seemed to come from nowhere. All of these players did, which made it more exciting because you hadn't heard, on this first programme of the first Boro game at the Riverside, it says Brian Robson has made Croatian international Igor Svitanovic Boro's fourth £1 million signing. That signing never actually happened.
Really?
He failed the fitness test. But I remember getting that and going,
of course,
I think I've heard about him on CFAX.
Yeah.
So you're not getting weeks of Sky Sports News and weeks of Twitter going, I think we're getting them. You've just got these fellas suddenly, and then you've got someone like Tony Yeboah who's smashing them in like that, and you're going to school the next day and doing it. And, it's just impossibly exciting.
When foreign players were coming into the UK, there was that kind of unknown, which would give this a kind of sexiness to it, I suppose, as well.
Big time. Absolutely.
Anybody that was foreign was going to be a good signing because of the
and not only had you not heard of them, you'd not heard of the country sometimes. I probably had barely heard of Croatia in 1995. And so, Yeboah exemplified that.
Celtic later on in the season will go on to sign Josh Cadet, and Josh Cadet's time at Celtic would be delayed, his debut, because of paperwork, which turns out Jim Farry, the SFA chief executive at the time, had delayed it deliberately. Farry would later lose his job over that. Cadet signing appears in an April night, then eventually weeks later for Celtic against Aberdeen, scores in his debut. The stadium erupts. It's so loud that Radio 5 goes off the air, and this is just this build up to see Josh Cadet, who appears weeks beforehand on the pitch with his tan jacket and scarf on, and then comes and just delivers an amazing crowning performance to kind of come along with his debut. So there's so much in terms of not knowing what somebody's going to be like. Juninho would also come to Celtic later on, which was, it didn't work out the way it did. Celtic would sign one other Brazilian in between, but he would be shite. Literally. December, we are into times for building up for the Euros around the corner, and well, the Euros are coming up. The Republic of Ireland are defeated by the Netherlands and eliminated in the playoff for Euro 96. The match takes place at Anfield. John Aldridge makes hopes for a fairy tale return, but it's not to be, and Ireland lose 2-1 to the Dutch. Jack Charlton is one of many great stories of success in World Cups with Ireland and European Championships. He was also a Middlesbrough manager. What's your thoughts? Have you any memories at all from Jack around the Middlesbrough time?
It's always the stories that are passed down of him being our greatest ever manager. Took the club from the second division to high up in the first, and to a fan of a certain generation it was a hero. Came back actually for a second spell in the 80s and rescued them from relegation. So very much loved on Teesside. I remember him because I used to get autographs after every game, and I always remember getting Big Jack's autograph. And my dad, I didn't really know who he was, let's be honest, when I was 10, but my dad always nudging me forward to get Big Jack's autograph from him. You know, I judge a lot of people by what I remember them being like as autograph hunters, and he was good with Big Jack, but he never messed around to listen. And if you said, "Can you write it to Daniel?" there was none of that. It was just name, shove, elbow,
Right.
bang. Oh, very efficient.
I noticed in the When Saturday Comes podcast, you refer to Jack Charlton's shredded wheat adverts.
Yeah,
which
yeah.
I remember as a staple part of the 1990s on TV.
Yeah.
But I love Jack Charlton. One of the culturally important things is Jack Charlton and what he did for football in Ireland, because by leading the team, which had consisted mainly of a lot of players who'd been born in the UK but had Irish grandparents, and the part of the diaspora story, Jack's adventures, I suppose, with Ireland in the World Cup and the European Championships lays the path for the next generation. And without Jack Charlton, without that, the way he went about his business, I think that culturally the landscape of football in Ireland would be completely different.
Yeah, absolutely right. And of course, he gave Bernie Slaven his caps, who was a Scotsman from Castlemilk. Should have played for Scotland, but that was a time when you had so many good centre forwards. He was never going to get a look in. So Big Jack picked one of my early heroes there.
Bernie Slaven, Albion Rovers ace as well, yeah. European adventures for British teams are cut short early on. Manchester United, Liverpool, Leeds are dumped out of Europe. Blackburn Rovers have a bit of a nightmare in the Champions League. I remember seeing a sign saying, are these your champions for Blackburn Rovers? Graham Lasso and David Batty end up scrapping.
Yeah.
And Lasso breaks his hand by throwing a punch at Batty.
Yeah.
Kenny Dalglish moves away, as I said, upstairs. It's a bit of a capitulation for Blackburn Rovers. And, this is the kind of pinnacle for Blackburn. They never have a sniff of the title again.
No.
Have there been other teams, you think, over the years who've failed to defend as champions as such?
Not to that degree, have they? I mean, Leicester a couple of years ago have really done well to keep up with the top 3 or 4, because it is very hard when it's a bit of a flash in the pan, as it was for Blackburn. And it just shows you that we were the same as Blackburn in that a local working class industrialist that had made a lot of money from steel in Jack Walker's case, from chemicals and moving them around in haulage in Steve Gibson's case. They were so rich and wealthy and disliked for it. This is 90 minutes from the end of that season to the start of 97, the next season when we signed Ravanelli, really laying into Middlesbrough for throwing money around. And now Steve Gibson is impoverished compared to most club owners. Yeah. But that was just a couple of years when a local industrialist with tens of millions rather than billions could do something, and that Middlesbrough really were trying to replicate the Blackburn. That was the template for a few different clubs, I think, in that time.
You get big clubs now that are literally owned by countries.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's
whereas
the
then
difference.
Your local industrialists could do it, and luckily our local industrialist has never lost interest and is still writing off millions of pounds of debts every year.
It's such a changed days when guys who might have been successful car salesmen built a car company, then take over a club.
Yeah.
But you see what happens with things like Gretna, where the money doesn't go into it anymore, and all of a sudden that's the kind of demise of the club.
Right.
European teams in Scotland, we have, I suppose, Rangers are finished bottom of the Champions League against Dortmund, Juventus and Steaua Bucharest. A great Juve side at the time who go on to win the tournament, beating Ajax in the final.
With Ravanelli.
Yes, who would then go on to Middlesbrough. European Cup winner going to Middlesbrough.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the changing in things that are going to be going ahead. Celtic crash out against PSG, who I remember Pierre Van Hooydonk missing a good chance with a header and blaming it on the lights that you saw there.
The John Lukic defence.
Yeah, well, as well, we didn't really know very much. Patrice Loco was the big name at PSG at the time, and it was reading all about him in the paper, but not really seeing.
No, he was good on Sensible Load of Soccer, I think.
Yes, a fantastic game at the time as well.
Yeah.
Motherwell crash out against Finnish side Mupa 47, but Wraith Rovers venture into the UEFA Cup, having broke my heart the previous season. They won the League Cup against Celtic. They are defeated by Bayern Munich, who go on to win the tournament. Jurgen Klinsmann returns to Britain, to Kirkcaldy, to play Wraith Rovers. That's like, if you're as a man who loves the lower division football as well and knows the stadiums inside out, can you imagine Bayern Munich stepping off and coming to Scotland to play against Wraith Rovers.
It's just a brilliant story all around, isn't it? There's so many Wraith fans who still have a picture of the scoreboard away when they were leading, and it's a moment that feels impossible now, isn't it? Not just for Wraith, but for most smaller clubs, and the clubs apart from Rangers and Celtic struggle in Europe usually, don't they? And what a brilliant moment.
Fantastic. I mean, hopefully as well, we get winners of the League Cup, winners of the Scottish Cup this season that are going to be coming up. St Johnstone League Cup winners, and then obviously when we go into 2021-22, who knows who's going to be the other team that's going to be in Europe. That Bayern Munich kit actually doubled up as the Crystal Palace kit, which was always felt was a bit weird when it was the exact same.
Yeah, that was happening season. A lot. The Chelsea grid one we mentioned was the Forest had the grid as well.
Yeah, so did Celtic away. That was the black and green one.
Come on, lads, be a bit more inventive. Look what the area lads were doing with the weaving in local landmarks. Yeah, you could have had all sorts.
That's just these other clubs could have done. I think it's just a kind of Umbro stock catalogue at the time was still being used quite a lot, which is kind of, we're not too far off the Adidas equipment sort of days of strips, but it's just like, we'll take page 48. I actually used to go into Grieve Sports and ask for the catalogues under the pretence that I had football teams that I was choosing teams for, new strips for, and they'd give me them and I would just go home and draw strips.
It's just tremendous.
And I wished, like yourself, I hadn't thrown things away. You've got so much good stuff there. I can't think of too many other instances when it's not been a Premiership team that's gone into Europe. Can you think any off the top of your head at all?
No. It's an incredible thing, isn't it? It was nearly Middlesbrough because in '97 two cup finals and a relegation.
That must have been heartbreaking. We'll come on to that when we were doing 96.
I'm not ready. I'm still not ready. And you need sort of a psychiatrist in the room if you do that. It'll be like this morning where they get that Greek woman to come and explain my feelings to me.
Elsewhere in Europe, off the field, the European Court of Justice, there is the matter of a court case as a relatively unknown Belgian footballer called Jean-Marc Bosman is about to change the game completely. When his contract with Liège had expired, he attempted to join Dunkirk. In 1990, Liège valued him higher at 500,000. They insisted that the French team paid up front. They refused. Jean-Marc Bosman's wages are cut by 75% to £500 a month. I'm not sure how much that is at that time, the equivalent of the money. This led to Bosman challenging the system legally. He sues Liège, the Belgian FA, UEFA. Whilst he changes the game, he's almost completely blackballed from European football, and he becomes like a sacrificial lamb that changes not only how football is, but how footballers' contracts are viewed, that footballers are workers. How different would football and landscape have been had Jean-Marc Bosman not done this? What
a moment. Again, if you're arguing for this as the most important season, that's a huge tenet in the argument, isn't it? I guess to footballers, a patron saint now, really, because the freedom it could give them for the huge signing on fees, whereby they would, a lot of clubs sort of made up for the fee they weren't paying by bumper wages and bumper signing on fees. So I think there should be a statuette of him in many a footballer's home, really.
Well, we John Collins, who's one of the first to kind of go on a Bosman, who's linked with Middlesbrough, who goes to Monaco eventually. Fergus McCann challenges this and says that Monaco's a principality and wants a fee. But like the idea that Bosman had said, now you've got the 25 or so richest clubs, they transfer players for astronomical sums, but now it's kind of gone back that way again, where the big players are still going to go to the biggest clubs. You've got Paul Lambert going from Motherwell to Dortmund. Collins is linked with Boro as well, QPR. I wonder how that would have been as well had he gone to Middlesbrough too.
I remember that rumour strongly. Sadly, there was no photo fit of him on the front of the Sports Gazette, but it would have been in the Robson Ilk, actually, a strong left foot, a creative. Would have loved that signing to happen. The other one that sticks in my mind around that time was Kanchelskis, who we nearly signed, and they've shown him around Ayresome Park. And I said, why have they shown him around Ayresome Park?
It's a completely different stadium. There's also the big changes. They've been the 3+2 foreigner rule in European football, meaning that clubs, there's now a new quality of player that can come in. It can't just be 3 EU players, left, right, and centre. Now you don't have to choose between who you can field. which ultimately trickles down to the effect on the quality in the Champions League, the effect on clubs' quality throughout Europe. So it's a massive season whenever we think about things just kicking off with Bergkamp going to Arsenal. Everything is going to have this ripple effect that will change everything else. On the subject of clubs going and players coming in that are quality players, we're in January now, and Faustino Asprilla signs for Newcastle.
Yeah. I mean, I was at his debut. Here's the sports preview from the Gazette. Keegan versus Robson. Brilliant subplot in that whole season. 2 England captains and greats going up against each other in the northeast. And Asprilla's debut at the Riverside, it was an incredibly snowy day, snowy week. Asprilla flew into Teesside Airport, had a glass of wine for his lunch, and was told he would just be on the bench to see how things would go. But he came on, and we were leading at the time. We were well on top of Newcastle, but he absolutely changed it. He baffled Steve Vickers, who'd never seen that turn of pace before and those tricksy legs before. And I just remember the sickness of hearing that away end, singing his name and beating us. Oh, God.
Sorry to bring up these memories. We maybe need Claire Rayner in with us.
I do. But what there was a rumour at the time, not only was he coming in on the private jet, but he was going to get a helicopter to the Riverside. And when I'm thinking back of this era, we were obsessed with helicopters from the death of Roy Race. Oh, no, sorry everyone. From the injury of Roy Race, Roy of the Rovers, to all the graphics. When you look at graphics of the time, 2 types of graphic. One, stadium designs, future planned stadiums, Bolton, Middlesbrough, Coventry, etc. Sunderland, they've always got helicopters on the graphics. I don't know who they thought was going to be arriving by helicopter, the managers or something. And then the graphics on television. So when Sky building up a new season, here we go, there's always helicopters blasting off out of a graphic, landing somewhere or other. There's just a general helicopter mania going on in the mid-1990s.
If we can get the kind of clearance for putting on the Sky's build up to this season, it's the Queen. What's the song they used for it again? I think One Vision.
Yeah, it works brilliantly.
They have a kind of montage of players arriving. Like Tony Boa comes directly from Ghana.
Yeah, some slightly dubious thoughts behind it.
It reminds me of a montage of maybe superheroes coming together where they don't want to have a backstory, so they just kind of put them all in. The Premier League. In Scotland, we've still got. I think we've got Stiltskin, if you believe it, for our one, which is and people with face paint. Which always brings back memories of watching Sky matches at my grandma's house. My brother would go through this season of feeling kind of maybe it might be off some days, off school, and then my grandma would look after him during the day, and then maybe if he saw a good match being advertised, he might get a bit sicker towards the evening. My grandma would say, it might as well just stay here. And just
it's funny, because we didn't have Sky either, but my granddad also got himself Sky, and I still got a lot of the homemade videos that he would do me of matches with his sort of wobbly writing on them. Always, it's a lovely thing to come across and see his handwriting on Monday Night Football from that era. Absolutely.
I'm going to put our graphic that we're going to have for housing some of the images here. We'll put a wee Juninho, a wee pair of Van Hooydonk, and we'll keep a little video.
Well, here's
the tapes to go in.
Of course, all Juninho's are wee because he was only 5'5", but here's a particularly small one. Still boxed like I'm the 40-year-old virgin, which 8 months' time. And of course, these two, we already had Nick Barmby and Craig Hignett playing behind Jano Fjortoft. Well. Yeah, but we had Hignett, and they were called the Midget Gems. And arguably, when Juninho came in, he disrupted all of that, and our form wasn't great. There's a lot of revisionism about that first season, and I loved watching Juninho from the word go, the way he moved, the way his legs moved, the way he just tripped his way around people. I'd never seen anything like it, but it did disrupt the rhythm of the team. But that ruins a bit of a narrative, I think, if you mention that.
I really wonder how the Corinthian guys would have maybe got all their footage, because there was lots of players from like Hibs, Celtic, Hearts, Rangers, teams from England, and having to sculpt Dave McPherson. And also
fair play.
Got some tremendous work before the days of motion capture and everything else. Just like trying to get things right. I'll need to dig out some of the ones I've got from home. Also, some of the players that were suggested to be sculpted as well and carved. Maybe some questionable decisions made there as well. back to the Premier League and talking about things being disrupted, people blamed Asprilla's signing on the disruption that it caused to Newcastle's win record. They picked up 57 points prior to signing Asprilla. They've been pursued by Man United, who haven't given up, who are maintaining this continuity. The idea that Asprilla signing has a negative effect, Beardsley says this is rubbish. Ferdinand points out to the lack of tactics that might have happened, and the idea that Kevin Keegan just put blind faith in players and said, go out and do your best, go and win it. There's also the signing of David Batty that comes a few weeks beforehand. David Batty's first 6 matches, Newcastle lose 4 games. Surely that's going to have a massive impact. But also the quality of some of the Manchester United not having the best team, but having maybe the best player in Cantona is a huge thing.
Yeah, they were incessant as well from when he got back on October the 1st. It just, every week they seemed to become more and more of a machine. And the key game in that is probably when they went to St James Park and Newcastle absolutely battered them but lost 1-0, and of course Cantona scored and Schmeichel was just incredible that day. And that was when you thought, I think they're gonna do this, aren't they? Which was a great hope to me because I wanted them to, let's be honest about it. And the Asprilla thing, that's really interesting about the Batty statistics, because it did seem a strange signing to go so sideways so suddenly, but as did having Mark Lawrenson as your defensive coach at the time.
Whenever Kenny Dalglish took over and he asked Mark Lawrenson what do you do as a defensive coach, and Mark Lawrenson was like saying, I'll just play a bit of football on a Friday afternoon. Not much really. So that was kind of what it did.
Yeah, exactly that. There's great little things about Keegan's way with that squad. Anytime they were coming back from an away game in the south of England, they always stopped in Wetherby, which is just outside Leeds, which is exactly halfway between London and Edinburgh, if you want to picture it. A lovely little town where my dad grew up. And always went to the Wetherby Whaler, one of the finest fish and chip shop on earth. I'm open to all sponsorship from them. And had their fish and chips from there. They stopped in Wetherby. They could be seen buying 30 portions for all the crew and everything. And it's brilliant, again, that thing about 95 being the old and the new. To imagine David Ginola with a pickled onion and some scraps and some sachet sauce and some dandelion and burdock sat on a wall by the river.
Yeah, well, I mean, he was shocked at the fact that Newcastle shared a training ground with the university.
Yeah.
So whenever he goes in and he's getting a fritter or a roll and chips, then it's it's called a chip roll, mate. It's a bar. What is a bar?
It depends where he stops. Yeah, it'd be a stotty in Newcastle. So
he might have just passed on it.
Or a farge. A lot of older George used to call them a farge, which could get you into a bit of trouble if people said,
Is that right?
Yeah, what's in your farge, love?
The one of the most defining moments of that season, or any season, is the Newcastle 4-3 game with Liverpool, where Liverpool are triumphant 4-3, which I watched the match on teletext. Just like, no way.
I think exactly the same, Paul, as so often with us too. But you look back on it now, you go, as if you would have access to it, and people will say, "Did you watch that game?" And when you're right, you watched it going, flick, call him off.
Yeah, come back every so often. And also our, depending what channel we had or how bad the wind was, our teletext would miss letters every so often. So the next season, my dad started following a team called Hesterfell in the FA Cup, which turned out to be Chesterfield. But Hesterfell was, so that season, watching things come up and then not knowing and then missing a goal because your teletext has missed that line. So I think whenever we look at coverage of this game, the 4-3 game, I'll use it via the medium of teletext for this. One of the images of kind of Keegan slumped over, you talked about sitting in the steps, but they slumped over the hoardings at Anfield. I think this is one of the images of the season. I think if you're going to pick one, it would probably be that moment, because it's got everything. It's got the big Adidas coats, those sports jackets that we like to get for Christmas if our parents could afford them, and the fact it's Keegan who is the figure of the season, and the sheer emotion he put into football in an age now of cold Premier League arrogant managers with their 3-word answers. I'm looking at you, Manchester City, Guardiola, to see someone acting like a fan as he did and slumped on that image sums up everything about that season. Anfield erupting, his Anfield, where he's loved
what a story.
Yeah. Thinking about managers as well, you've got an manager's image these days. Alan Ball at Manchester City.
Yeah.
Last of the flat cap and jacket wearers.
Yeah, the season of Ball and Wenger. Amazing. I remember this is the Rioch went, an old Boro manager from Arsenal who'd signed Bergkamp, and I went down to Highbury to watch Boro in their annual thrashing at Highbury, and Wenger was manager by then. That'll be the year after though, and Robson played at sweeper in that one, those 2 years of the old guard, and from Alan Ball's flat cap to Arsene Wenger's pasta salads. Brilliant.
Yeah. Up in Scotland, Gaz's hitting the form that he showed. Not every single game, but there's moments of brilliance that are defining moments for Rangers, certainly. He's also getting away with a lot of things such as swinging elbows and jumping in front of the advertiser boardings. There's a game against Partick Thistle where Rod McDonald is sent off. It's seen as a kind of pivotal point. He's sent off for blessing himself as the second yellow that he receives. There's so much contention beyond this issue, looking at things such as religion, which is a massive thing in Scotland in the Scottish game. You have incidents that are then taken into the High Court, such as Duncan Ferguson's headbutt. Down in England, Duncan Ferguson goes to Berlin for 3 months.
Yeah, £6.50 a week for cleaning the floors, I think his job was.
Yes, actually, I think the Sky pre-season build-up has Duncan Ferguson sitting in a gym. I'm not sure if it's Everton or he was in Berlin at the time, but Esprit also sticks the head on a player and is fined £10,000.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff kind of going on as well outside the game that are kind of creeping in that I suppose is detrimental to the beautiful game.
Yeah. It's such a fascinating thing to be tried for an action on the pitch, isn't it? And it's interesting that it didn't happen really again. I think there was the odd case, wasn't there? But yeah, I don't know where that would have ended in terms of judgment of what's a violent act and what's a two-footed challenge. So very interesting.
Incidentally, the referee that sent off Rod McDonald, Jim McGilvery, retired very, very quickly after that happened. But we're down to the run-in, and Manchester United and Newcastle are going to the wire. As you spoke about earlier on, a real 6-pointer is won by Manchester United, cuts the lead to 1 point. Who scores? Cantona, as you said. Newcastle drop further points, and then we go into mind games. Daniel, people think there's multiple reasons that Newcastle didn't win the league. Failing player confidence, the Cantona's return, the idea that mind games is kind of passed around through football. It's kind of crept in as the legend that Alex Ferguson says when he's trying to spur on other teams against Newcastle. What's your thoughts on Sir Alex Ferguson's mind game?
It was one of the many geniuses of Ferguson, wasn't it? To stay quite calm and conniving and just... it was never spontaneous. He always knew which little line... Because it didn't just start with the famous one towards the end. He was nipping away from January, really. Did he write his lines the night before? Who knows? But it wasn't ever spontaneous. He knew what he was doing and it worked brilliantly. It's very clear now, watching it again. An expert, you can't, it's not nice. And everyone except Middlesbrough fans and Sunderland fans wanted Newcastle, and Manchester United fans wanted Newcastle to win it, because Keegan was the opposite. He was open, likeable, heart on the sleeve. Too open, really. Ruined by it very often. And so, part of Ferguson's genius. Can't help but admire the Machiavellian nature of it.
Keegan's outburst occurred after Newcastle's 1-0 Premier League victory against Leeds. It was the Magpies' third last game of the season, and the win was a third in succession. It was setting them up for the final 2 games against Forest and Tottenham. And Forest
on a Thursday night. I mean, that was a fixture pile-up thing going on as well, wasn't it, when they had to go to Forest on a Thursday night, and that all added to this tension that he was clearly feeling.
Well, Ferguson kind of stoked the tensions when he's kind of cast doubts on the commitment of Leeds and Forest to try as hard as they did against Newcastle, as they did against Manchester United. And Keegan obviously is angry and he's hitting out with when you do that with players like Stuart Pearce, I will love it if we beat them. That rant was my one of my list of terrible impressions that I did as a 15-year-old.
Be quiet, but I'll tell you something. He went down in my estimation when he said that. We have not resorted to that, but I'll tell you, you can tell him now, I'll be watching it, we're still fighting for this title, and he's got to go to Middlesbrough and get something. And I'll tell you, honestly, I will love it if we beat them. Love it.
You know, I will love it for you, mate. I love it. You know, but you know, this is really. He talks about they'll have to go to Middlesbrough. This is such an iconic moment. How hard was it to go to Middlesbrough and get something?
You know, it was as hard as if we'd played the under-12s. And I'm not saying they didn't try, but we'd had a terrible second half to the season because of largely because of the Juninho disruption, but also because of the amount of injuries we had. And so we just scraped 12th place by a few wins in the second year, but we were really we were on the beach by April, and that's the last game Keegan would have wanted to pick for Manchester United to go and play at Brian Robson and Viv Anderson's Middlesbrough. They were brilliant that day. I remember them just taking us apart. Giggs in particular being superb, and it was over from the first. You know, they were more dynamic in the warm up. That's how bad it was. You just thought. One of those, a very strange thing, seeing someone else win a league in front of you, and a lot of us stayed to watch. Just, I guess we know we'll never see that as Middlesbrough fans, so it's interesting and still strange feeling seeing people clapped one of their goals. I've never liked that.
Yeah,
I'm still not grown up enough to do that.
No.
I have grown up a bit, and I'm not as angry, and I don't feel rivalries much anymore or anything. But I still would never applaud an opponent's goal.
But Celtic's end of the season, Rangers win on record points. Celtic are so close. You know, they've lost to Rangers once that season, but couldn't find the net against them in other games to win anyway. You know, and Celtic kind of have that heartbreak of you really felt as if we were so close it would have changed everything. It'd have just, you know, Rangers wouldn't have got 8 in a row. Instead, Gaza is the star of the show in their last game of the season. They win against Aberdeen and then go on to win the Scottish Cup against Hearts. Manchester United, they go on to win the FA Cup as well. And ironically, they have this idea of the Spice Boys of Liverpool that are playing against, and Beckham, the emerging talent of Beckham, will become the biggest Spice Boy of them all.
Yeah, the Spice Boys. Yeah, that's another sign of football's mainstream acceptance when the labels are attached again and footballers are allowed to be mainstream heartthrobs and your mum's allowed to like them again. It's all part of that expert marketing as well, by clubs and by Sky and by the Premier League itself. Yes, Spice Boys. So in that year, we've definitely reached football being mainstream, accepted, trendy, and all of the rest.
I got a suit, and I had to get a suit for something. I can't remember what it was, but I got a collarless suit, kind of like the not the same kind of rain, obviously, but and then I thought that it might make me look a bit older if I was going to try and get into pubs later on. So I wore it, including once wearing it when I realised the ticket I had for a gig was the over 18s. I thought I better go and wear a suit, and I went to the Barrowlands to watch the Tones in a suit. Anyway,
I met Mark Walters a couple of years ago, and it was interviewing him, and I asked him about the white suit, and I can't even remember him even answering. I think he just went like that. So there you are.
This is also now building up to the Euros, which is going to be massive, and I think there's a whole podcast on the Euros, on the summer of '96, which we'll come back to. I'm sure the Olympics as well, the African Cup of Nations, which is massive. But Manchester United ultimately are the champions in England, and Rangers win the league in Scotland. Both our teams had moments of highs, moments of lows, but in terms of world football, this is a huge change this season. As much as Keegan's team fell away, you look back to Alan Hansen's comments in the first day of the season that you can't win with kids. Ferguson dismantles his old United side, double winning one, builds this team with kids. There's newspaper poll in the Manchester Evening News that want Ferguson sacked, and then in this team's season he takes them to a second double. This achievement, along with Cantona's remarkable contribution to the successful running, is sort of recalled these days. Ferguson obviously would go and achieve much more, but is this one of the biggest achievements in football? The clean slate, starting again, and with a few old heads and some young boys to achieve such success?
Absolutely, and it marked Ferguson as one of the great managers. Of course, we know he is now, but all of the greats usually had to have at least 2 or 3 rebuilds. You know, Shankly did it at Liverpool, Steen did it, and that was the first time he'd had a very successful rebuild that would lead to 5 more years of trophies. And I think, for all I the rock and roll story, the much more interesting story. Newcastle is the story you would make the movie about, but the steady novel is really the brilliance of Ferguson, plotting in a Machiavellian way, but plotting in a footballing way. His eye for footballers and his manner of bonding them together into a unit.
How different do you think this league would have been if Newcastle had won the league?
Would it have changed the next year? What would Newcastle have done? Who would they have bought? That's an exciting thing, because they would have had, Shearer probably that next summer, and so would it have taken them into a whole different stratosphere? Probably, yeah. Or would they have? I suspect they would have had a massive, exciting, enjoyable collapse that I would have really enjoyed.
On the front of great managers, as we come to the end of this podcast, Bob Paisley passes away. There's legacy planning within. As you spoke about Shankly to Paisley to Dalglish to the Liverpool boot room, and this is unlike what's happened with Blackburn when Dalglish goes to Hartford. But and you talk about the building of success. Do you think this is something that clubs can still do today through this management builds, or now as soon as somebody goes to look for the next big thing, instant success? Is there that? It's so different from what it was back then.
It is, but there is a bit of a modern obsession with blueprints and with legacies and things, and I do wonder how much you can truly plan football. Certainly you must plan the finances to continue to exist, but it's such a chaotic sport deep down, no matter how much you can still market it. And that's why I am still in love with the game. For all the money we're talking about here, it has retained a lot of the values of once you get onto the pitch that it had then. And so it's similar. They call it a blueprint now, or they call it a philosophy, or even better, they say it's in our club's DNA. That's really the new version of the boot room in some ways. So all different models coexisting as we are, and it will just remain a completely compelling sport, but possibly none more so than that season, which is, for me, now that we've talked about it, the most compelling season I've lived through.
Yeah, and to think the Britpop battle, I don't say Britpop, but the battle of Oasis and Blur at the start of the season, Man City, Chelsea, Man City will go down that season. Ultimately, they will lose. You can't explain the 1990s Man City to the modern day.
No, and
glory hunter Man City
we haven't mentioned Georgie Kincladze being one of those.
Wonderful,
we haven't mentioned Savo Milosevic either. Most of the clubs seem to have their foreign talisman, which was a mark of the season, and Kincladze is so unlucky to be in a relegated side.
Yeah, and now both these clubs, Man City and Chelsea, will take on each other in the Champions League final, which is so different. But you're completely right. There was wonderful glimpses of what could have been for some teams, and wonderful memories that if you live through that season, you'll have great memories of those players that played for your teams. The football, in terms of moving off, is only a matter of a few weeks because everything's building up to the Euros. Scotland and England will clash. Football will come home, but that's another story. But in the meantime, all that's left for me to do is to thank my guest, Daniel Gray, for joining me today to look at matters of 95-96, and to thank you for tuning in. We do have a Twitter and an Instagram of Sell the Jerseys. Please subscribe and keep up with what's going on. I'll post any show notes, illustrations and all that to those sites as well. And many thanks to Paul John Dykes and to Kelvin Craig, who I called Kelvin Wilson in the last podcast. It's a very Alan Partridge thing to suddenly have to go back and do it, to start off by saying that. So I do apologise, Kelvin Craig, for the editing, put everything together. You've been watching A State of Mind, Sell the Jerseys. You can't win anything with the kids. The story of the 95-96 season. The story so far, the story continues. Take care of yourselves and each other. All the best. And I will love it if we beat them. Love it.
Just a bit of history.
It is! Out with a shot, and it's there!